For over 2 decades, Dan Snyder seemed untouchable. He owned one of the most valuable franchises in the NFL, a historic team in one of the richest sports leagues on earth, a billionaire surrounded by power, influence, and protection from one of the most exclusive clubs in America, NFL ownership. And for years, no matter how bad things became, he survived. Fans hated him. Former employees exposed toxic workplace culture.
Cheered because for me, I didn't think it was going to happen. Well, I wished it was to happen, but to actually hear it from, Congresswoman Maloney to say we're subpoenaing him was huge.
Congressional investigations intensified. Sponsors distanced themselves. Even other owners reportedly became frustrated with the constant controversy surrounding the franchise, but Snyder stayed. Every scandal felt like it would finally end his reign, and somehow it never did. Until suddenly, everything changed. Because the story of the Washington Commanders' sale wasn't just about football, it became a story about power collapsing in real time. A billionaire losing control of an empire he once treated as permanent. And the deeper this situation became, the more dangerous the questions got. How does someone own an NFL franchise for over 20 years and still lose everything? Why did the league finally allow him to fall? And perhaps the biggest question of all, did Dan Snyder willingly sell the team, or was he quietly pushed out by forces more powerful than him? Because behind the headlines, lawsuits, and billion-dollar numbers was something far more fascinating, a slow-motion collapse of trust, reputation, and power that the NFL could no longer hide from the world. When Dan Snyder bought the Washington franchise in 1999, it looked like the beginning of a new era. At just 34 years old, he became one of the youngest owners in NFL history. He was aggressive, wealthy, ambitious, and determined to restore one of football's proudest organizations back to dominance. At the time, the franchise still carried enormous historical weight, multiple Super Bowls, massive fan loyalty, one of the biggest markets in sports. Snyder wasn't buying a rebuilding team, he was buying an NFL giant. And early on, Snyder operated with complete confidence. He spent aggressively, hired big-name coaches, signed star players, chased headlines constantly. On the surface, it looked like ambition, but over time, something else became obvious. There was no long-term stability. Coaches rotated constantly. Front office structure felt chaotic. Football decisions became increasingly reactionary. Instead of building a consistent culture, the organization often looked trapped in cycles of desperation and dysfunction. And yet, despite all the criticism, Snyder still held power because NFL ownership itself is incredibly protected. That's what makes this story unique. In most industries, public pressure can force leadership changes quickly, but NFL owners operate differently. They are part of an exclusive circle where removal is almost unheard of. Once you own a team, you're not just wealthy, you're part of a private club worth billions, which meant Snyder could survive almost anything as long as the other owners tolerated him. And for years, they did. Even while fans became increasingly furious, even while the franchise's reputation declined, even while the team struggled competitively, culturally, and publicly, because owners rarely turn against one of their own. At least, not until the damage becomes impossible to contain. The real collapse of Snyder's empire didn't happen because of wins and losses. It happened because the controversy surrounding the franchise became too large to ignore. Reports about workplace misconduct inside the organization began surfacing publicly, painting a picture of a toxic environment that shocked even longtime NFL observers. Former employees described fear, intimidation, and systemic dysfunction behind the scenes. What initially looked like isolated accusations slowly evolved into something much larger, a public relations disaster that threatened not just Snyder, but the league itself. And this is where things became dangerous for the NFL. Because the Washington franchise wasn't just another struggling team anymore. It became a symbol of everything critics accused the NFL of protecting: unchecked power, lack of accountability, and billionaire ownership operating without consequences. Congress became involved, investigations expanded, media attention intensified. Suddenly, this was no longer just a football story, it became national news. Sponsors started paying attention, corporate relationships became strained, public trust continued collapsing, and perhaps most importantly, The other NFL owners reportedly began growing uncomfortable with how much damage the situation was causing the league's image. That matters because the NFL protects one thing above all else: the shield. The league can tolerate losing seasons. It can tolerate controversy temporarily, but it cannot tolerate long-term damage to the brand itself. And Snyder's situation was beginning to feel radioactive. But even then, Snyder didn't immediately lose power. Instead, what followed was a tense standoff between a billionaire owner refusing to disappear and a league increasingly desperate to move forward without him. One of the most fascinating parts of this story is how quiet the real battle became. Publicly, the NFL often appeared cautious in its handling of Snyder. Statements were controlled, investigations moved carefully. Discipline seemed limited compared to the scale of public outrage. To many fans, it looked like the league was protecting him. But behind the scenes, pressure was reportedly building, and this is where NFL ownership politics become incredibly important. Owners don't just run teams, they share business interests worth billions together. Revenue sharing, television deals, sponsorships, franchise valuations, it's all interconnected, which means one owner becoming toxic can affect everyone else financially. That changes everything. Because once other owners start viewing someone as a threat to the league's business stability, loyalty disappears quickly. And according to multiple reports over time, Snyder's relationships with other owners became increasingly strained. Allegations emerged that Snyder had gathered damaging information on other owners and league officials. Whether fully accurate or not, the perception alone created paranoia and tension. Now the story wasn't just scandal. It was power warfare, and the NFL hates public power warfare because the league's image depends heavily on projecting stability and control. Owners fighting publicly threatens that image. Congressional investigations threaten that image. Corporate sponsors feeling uneasy threatens that image. Eventually, the pressure reached a breaking point. Not officially, not publicly, but quietly. And that's what makes the eventual sale so fascinating. Because while Snyder technically sold the team willingly, many people around the league viewed the situation differently. To them, it looked less like a voluntary exit, and more like a billionaire realizing he no longer had enough allies left to survive. When the Washington Commanders were eventually sold to a group led by Josh Harris, the price itself became historic, over $6 billion, one of the largest franchise sales in sports history, and that number reveals something important about modern NFL ownership. Even failure can become wildly profitable. Despite years of controversy, dysfunction, and public outrage, Snyder still walked away with enormous wealth because NFL franchise values have exploded beyond imagination. The league prints money through television rights, sponsorships, gambling partnerships, and global branding. Ownership itself has become one of the most exclusive and lucrative assets in the world. That reality created mixed reactions. Some fans celebrated because Snyder was finally gone. Others felt frustrated because despite everything, he still profited massively from the sale. But emotionally, the sale represented something bigger than money. It felt like the end of an era fans had desperately wanted to escape. For years, Washington supporters watched one of the NFL's proudest franchises drift into irrelevance, controversy, and instability. Coaching changes, front office chaos, stadium frustration, brand damage, endless headlines unrelated to football. The sale created hope that the organization could finally reset culturally, financially, and competitively. And perhaps most importantly, it symbolized something many fans thought impossible: an NFL owner actually losing control under overwhelming pressure that almost never happens, which is why this story became larger than football itself. The downfall of Dan Snyder's ownership teaches something fascinating about modern sports power. Empires rarely collapse all at once. They erode slowly. At first, Snyder's problems looked manageable. Losing seasons happen, fan criticism happens, ownership controversies happen. But over time, the damage kept stacking, and eventually, the combined weight of scandal, public outrage, league pressure, sponsor discomfort, and political attention became too massive to contain. What makes this story so compelling is that Snyder didn't lose because he ran out of money. He lost because he ran out of protection. That's a huge difference. For years, the NFL's ownership structure insulated him from consequences. But once enough powerful people began viewing him as a liability instead of an ally, his position became fragile in a way it never had before. And in the NFL, perception matters almost as much as reality. Once the league collectively realized the Washington situation was damaging the brand itself, the pressure shifted permanently. The question stopped being, can Snyder survive this? It became, how long can the league afford to keep defending him? That's when the empire truly began collapsing. Not publicly at first, quietly. Behind meetings, negotiations, financial discussions, and ownership relationships. And by the time the sale happened, it felt less like a business transaction and more like the NFL finally deciding it needed a clean break from one of the darkest reputational eras in league history. The story of Dan Snyder losing the Washington Commanders isn't just a football story. It's a story about how power actually works behind billion-dollar industries. Because for years, Snyder looked untouchable, wealthy, protected, immovable. The kind of owner fans believed would never truly face consequences no matter how bad things became. And honestly, for a long time they were right, but eventually, something changed. The pressure became too public. The controversies became too large. The damage became too expensive. And once enough powerful people inside the NFL decided the situation threatened the league itself, Snyder's protection slowly disappeared. That's what makes this story so fascinating. An NFL owner didn't just sell a team,